Okay. Well, thank you. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come out and learn about where we are at in replacing the Lake-Woodbine Bridge. My name is Michael Thomas. I'm Director of Public Works for Lake Forest. With me is Byron Kreutz. Byron is our Superintendent of Engineering. Byron oversees the world of capital projects for the city. Then we have the operational side, Dan Martin, who's not here this evening. Jim Lockefear, Jim's our assistant to the director, handles all of our grants, some of our larger projects as well. We have our engineering firm, Lochner and Associates. Dave Shannon, Dave's in the back there. Brad Nowak. And then with the historic preservation architectural firm, Meg Kindlin. Meg is working with Lochner and has worked with them as we've sort of progressed through putting together what we call a phase 1 design report. Purpose, we can go to that slide, please.
Actually, you have a clicker up there.
Okay. Perfect.
I don't know if that's activated, but I'll do it for you.
You want to do it?
Yeah.
Keep going, please. Let's go to the purpose. There we go. So we obviously have a focus that we want to place on this evening's meeting. If I can, before we go through this, I want to run through just to give some context. Byron, myself, Jim, Dan, a handful of us in engineering and public works, we look at the city's entire infrastructure annually, probably August, September timeframe. Asphalt roads, concrete sidewalks, water main, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, water plant, buildings, roads, bridges, parking lots, bluff, all of that. We do that annually. The number one item on the list, Lake-Woodbine Bridge. Lake-Woodbine Bridge, bless you. Lake-Woodbine Bridge is an older bridge. We had all of our bridges studied and analyzed in 2020, and the report came back that the number one bridge that we really needed to focus on was Lake-Woodbine. Ironically, the second one is right out here at Illinois. So purpose this evening, we're going to reintroduce the project. We had actually done some work back in 2014 and 2015, so we're going to bring it back, reintroduce it, review the current condition of the bridge, present the various design options, the bridge structure, the railings, the lane width, the sidewalk width, some of which are going to be dictated to us by Illinois Department of Transportation, and we're going to talk about that as well. The limitations imposed on funding. Right now we have a budget of about 2.5 to 2.9 million, so that will cause some limitations as well. Review the timeline and then highlight the preliminary plans to mitigate construction. We obviously know with a ravine and the homes and the traffic that is on Lake Road from the beach, we need to be very careful on how we go ahead and progress through the construction. That's going to be a big part of this. So we're going to take our time putting that plan together. Then obviously public input on the various design options. Obviously, I think everyone knows exactly where the bridge is at, just north of Woodbine, south of Barberry. Next slide. Nice picture of the bridge to give context, as all of the stormwater essentially east of Lake Road runs through our ravine system down to the lake. This is one of those systems as well. So the preliminary discussion to date, as I referenced back in 2014, 2015, the HPC, the City's Historic Preservation Commission, had actually done a preliminary review on the bridge, and they directed staff to do a further analysis to go back and discuss further whether repair could occur or whether replacement. And after some additional data and a deeper dive and a deeper study on the bridge, it was determined that the bridge had to be replaced. And we're going to go into a little more depth on that to explain that further. The HPC also directed communication and coordination with obvious stakeholders, the different historic preservation groups in town, the residents, the neighbors, and then The State Historic Preservation Commission, they directed that the improvements be compatible with the surrounding historic district, and that the plans would ultimately be reviewed by SHPO, by the State Historic Preservation Commission as well. So all of those things are going to occur. This is going to take, it's a process for us is going to take a little bit longer because we're seeking a grant. When we seek a grant, we actually have to do a phase 1 review. We have to do a phase 2 design, submit them. It takes a little bit of time to get through this grant process. So the timeline is probably at least 2 years out till we're looking at construction. But again, I think Dave, you've got a slide on the schedule on that. So Meg, are you going to take it through here on the historic side? And then Dave will review some of the other items.
Thank you. So I am Meg Kindle and I'm a historic preservation architect, and I think I'm familiar with some of you here in the audience tonight. Just a moment before Lochner, sorry. Can I use this mic?
Can you just try, we don't want it to interfere with the Zoom, so maybe you can just try talking a little louder to begin with.
Sure. I don't think I can I?
We can try the microphone, and then we have someone here that'll let us know if it's causing issues.
Thank you.
So go ahead and just turn it on up top.
Oh, good, great. Hello, is that better? I can hear myself now. Okay, good. Well, to begin, I'm Meg Kindle, an historic preservation architect, as some of you here today are familiar. And so before we go on and talk with the engineers, just a moment to talk about what we're talking about with this bridge, give some vocabulary to the historic characteristics, and then talk about the challenges. So first of all, you know, when I think about this bridge, the site and its context in the historic district crossing the ravine, of course, you know, this idea that it's a straight flight over the ravine and what have you. Certainly the design of the bridge is very traditional with the repetition, with the balusters. It has a very pedestrian kind of friendly scale to it. It doesn't feel like a highway bridge. It feels like an element of the landscape. It doesn't feel industrial. So that's very important to us and to the design team. We have this triple arch design, which we enjoy, we appreciate, but from the engineering perspective, there are some challenges to that, which they are better to talk about than I. A lot of it having to do with environmental concerns, construction delays and what have you, but it is a very beautiful triple arch design. It cannot be denied. And then the balustrade itself, when we're talking about that, a couple things it does, it keeps, you know, it's a protection. Number one, it was built not to modern code, so it's not a modern protection. It is lovely, can't be denied. It is shorter than required. It does though have a nice openness. So when you're walking across the bridge, you can really feel you're part of the ravine, and that's very important. That connection, that visual connection, the breeze, etc. That bridge is really an element in the landscape. Let's see. And lastly, the material itself. It is concrete. It is historic concrete. And we all know that's different than modern. Modern concrete is bright. Typically, we can control the finish, but sometimes we associate it with a smoothness, with an industrial feel. We need to make sure that the color and perhaps the texture of that concrete with the replication of this bridge or the new bridge design is really controlled. So we're sensitive to that. Next slide. Let's see. So going on to design challenges. Certainly, the SHPO requirements are paramount. We have to work with the State Historic Preservation Agency. We do a lot of work with the agency for transportation projects. So I think that's going to be a good relationship. And I know here in Lake Forest, you have a good relationship with SHPO. So I think that's a comfortable ground to be working within. As far as the design, as we know, Idot has their standards for highway bridges, which this is. This is also a pedestrian bridge, but you know, as a preservation architect, be it a house, a train station, you know, a CTA station, a school, there's a reason codes exist, and that's to keep everybody safe. So we need to make sure that we accommodate and listen to the Idot requirements for crash barriers. And so that's just undeniable. We have to make sure, and this is why Lochner is involved, to make sure that we are, you know, keeping the traffic where it belongs and not in the ravine. The other idea that we need to have the width adjusted for modern cars. And also the sidewalk. The sidewalk has to be wide enough to meet modern code for the ADA. So there are codes that exist now that didn't exist when this bridge was designed. And we can't change that. We have to work with it. So those are part of the design constraints of this bridge, as well as historic. So as we go forward, you know, we have this triple arch design. You know, there are ways to, you know, recreate it if we need to. There's also some great ideas that the engineers have put together about doing a single arch and see if that's appropriate. That's an area of inquiry. And we'll be talking about that too, pros and cons of the shapes. And then lastly, the balustrade itself. So it was designed, and often even in a historic home, the balustrade has a lovely relationship to your hand. It just does. Often it's a nice shape. You can lean on it. That's not what we're looking for here, because we need the 42-inch guardrail because we are over a precipice. So, you know, modern code says we must protect the public. So that's another part of what has to happen. Sometimes when we're doing, I'm doing a bridge design in Morris, it's a recreation of an old aqueduct. It has a bike path as well. So that had to be even higher because your center of gravity is even higher on a bicycle. So there's just codes that need to be followed per the state and per local officials. Also, when we're looking at the balustrade, again, going back to the material, I think that's an important component here. It's concrete, but we can help, you know, in the historic preservation practice, we can make sure that it's, you know, compatible as far as not being a bright, very modern look. We need to make sure that that expression is appropriate. And we also are looking here for input, because this is a public meeting, about is it an open balustrade? Is it a closed balustrade? Is it of concrete? Is it not of concrete? So we're looking to have an opportunity to listen to these concerns. So I think, Dave?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for coming out tonight. I know it's a busy time of year, and it seems like the number of evenings that we have left before is running short. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the existing bridge itself, put things in context. It was constructed in 1912 as a 3-span closed spandrel arch. What that means is the bridge has 3 basic arches, and then the sides hold in material that the road is then based on. So basically it's a filled bridge. The material that's inside is sand or gravel or something that's porous. There's 1 vehicle lane in each direction, the same as on Lake Road. There's a sidewalk on the west side. It was repaired in 1978, at which time they took off both sides and probably replaced the roadway as well and put new railings on. So almost everything that you see, unless you get underneath the bridge, is from 1978. It's not original. And I'll show you some pictures of it. Here's the current railing. Some of the balusters are starting to actually come apart a little bit. It's generally worn and ready to be replaced. But when you get underneath, you start to see some things that raise the eyebrows a little bit higher. This is one of the piers, and you can see on the right-hand side that gray concrete is what was put in 1978, and everything to the left is original. It's showing a lot of map cracking, and if you can see some white lines, that's efflorescence. That's where water is actually seeping through and starting to pull the lime out of the concrete. That's a sign of advanced deterioration, and that's not repairable kind of deterioration. All right, next slide. This is looking up at the underside of the bridge, and you can see that exposed rebar that shouldn't be there. That's where concrete is actually fallen off. That line is probably the curb line up above, where water is leaking through at the curb line and coming straight down through the fill material in the bridge. It's gotten through to that steel, which is expanded a little bit and popped off that concrete. And this isn't the only place where that's happening. And then this is showing one of the abutments where you can see that water has gotten in behind the abutment and is starting to degrade that concrete as well. So it's for these reasons that we've recommended a replacement of this structure. So, as Mike mentioned, we've got 3 decision points that we're really considering. The width of the bridge, I know, is a concern, that it fits nicely in the adjacent community right now, and that there isn't much of an appetite for widening out this bridge. We are going to do our best to keep it as narrow as we can. The current IDOT guidance is that it needs to match the existing roadway on each side, which is slightly wider, maybe a foot or so. So the roadway itself will need to be slightly adjusted, but that's just to match the approach on each side. And then the sidewalk that's out there now is probably 3.5 feet. If you count the top of the curb, you can get another 6 inches, so it might be 4 feet wide. Current ADA criteria is 5 feet, so the sidewalk would have to be widened about a foot. So right now we're talking about widening the bridge by 2 feet if we have to. But again, that's according to IDOT criteria that we have to live by. Bridge structure options. You know, as Meg mentioned, there are a lot of architectural concerns that go hand in hand with the engineering considerations. And so we're looking at steel versus concrete and that type of a modern arch. If you could go to the next slide. The first option that we looked at was actually something very similar to what's there now. This bridge option has quite a few design flaws and strikes against it. It would basically just put back the inherent flaws that are that just occur with a bridge of this type. There's not much we can do about a filled arch bridge. It's moisture is gonna get in there and it's not gonna have anywhere to go. The other issue with this bridge is that we cannot put the new bridge back where the old bridge is currently located because we can't pull the old foundation out, and we can't reuse it because we're not sure what's there. It's 110 years old, and it is not engineeringly feasible to reuse a foundation that old. So if we did reuse this bridge type, we would have to be shifting it one direction or the other, or we'd have to start changing the arch lengths so that they could sit on the new foundations. That would also require quite a bit of construction down within the ravine itself to get new foundations in. And we are not only concerned with, from the project perspective, about what's the bridge going to look like, we're also concerned with how are we going to build it. We're also concerned with the health of the ravine. And if you've been under that bridge, you know that there's a lot of old broken concrete under there. It may not be, the bridge itself may not be the best thing for the ravine, having all that construction down there. And this may be an opportunity where we could actually pull some of that material out of the ravine, get rid of all that broken concrete that was left down there in 1978. And you know, help this ravine a little bit if we can while we're at it. For all those reasons, there's a few more that really this bridge type is not what we would recommend from an engineering standpoint. So we looked at a couple of other options. The first is a steel structure. It's got an arch that would mimic the existing arches. What's nice about this bridge is that it doesn't require any construction in the ravine. We can actually make the bridge a little bit shorter because we can pull in the abutments a little bit, so there'd be less structure out there. This bridge is fairly open. It would provide a lot of natural light underneath the structure, which hopefully would help out getting some vegetation growing into there. Next slide. This is an open spandrel arch, and the arch itself would be concrete. It also mimics the 3-span structure. This would require some foundations on the ravine wall itself, but you could probably construct those from the edge of the ravine. You wouldn't need a lot of heavy equipment in the ravine to construct this. This bridge could also be prefabricated, which lends itself to quality control with the concrete. You can get much better performance out of concrete when it can be mixed and poured at a precast plant than on site. They can speed the construction as well if they don't have to put all that formwork in by basically building the whole bridge at the precast plant, bringing it in on a truck. This one also, I believe we can adjust the length a little bit by where the abutments fall and maybe put on a little bit less of a structure. So those are the 3 bridge types that we are considering. Moving on to the railings. We do have very specific requirements because this is a bridge on a public roadway that's longer than 20 feet. And so it comes under IDOT's jurisdiction. So the railing itself has to be 3.5 feet tall. We have limitations on how wide any openings can be for safety because we can't have kids falling off, squeezing their way through a hole. It must meet crash test standards. I won't bore you with all the details of that, but there are different levels of crashworthiness. And I will discuss what that would require in some of the following slides. But since I mentioned the span length is long enough that it is an IDOT jurisdiction bridge, they're going to have the final say-so on whether or not our proposed railing meets their requirements. So as Meg mentioned, there are a lot of architectural things that we are trying to keep in mind when we're looking at different options. The first 2 are really variations of the same. It involves like a hybrid railing where the bottom 2 feet and 10 inches. If you could go to the next slide. The bottom 2 feet 10 inches is crashworthy. There are a few options that we can do with that. It can either be solid concrete that has some patterning to it, or it could have some open windows in it. But the crashworthiness is on the bottom. The total height needs to be at least 3.5 feet. We can go taller if we want to. And that's where, in this slide, we've got some ornamental railing shown. But really, it's up to the architects and their creativity to explore some options of what we want to do in that area. The next one, I think, is similar, just a different railing type. The third option is
Slides here. There you go.
the third option is an IDOT standard railing. There are a couple of versions of this depending on the height you want. You can either do the shorter with an ornamental railing on top, or you can do a taller version that is this pattern. You can have open or closed windows. It is all concrete. The large monolithic concrete endpoints are also a place where you can put a relief or some patterning. So there are some options of things that you can do with this. IDOT just requires that the basic railing itself, you don't change the reinforcement or the dimensioning, because that's what has been crash tested. Was I gonna say anything else about that? Oh, this one has also been developed in coordination with the State Historic Preservation Officer. And they work together to develop the details and the look and feel of this railing. And if you are in an area similar to this, where the SHPO has indicated that you should be considering a historic character type railing, and you propose to use this one, it's going to meet with their approval. So That is a railing that, as engineers, we like very much. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Byron, who is going to continue.
Thank you, Dave. So after we finish the formal presentation, we'll take some questions from the audience, both here in person and on the Zoom, general questions. And then after that, we'll be able to talk to people one-on-one by the easels and get any questions and comments that you have about the different options, both for the bridge and the railings that Dave just discussed. So now we just want to go over the funding basics. So the city is seeking outside funding for this, as was mentioned in the beginning. And basically that's the thing that the thing that is important to note is that IDOT will review this project irregardless of the funding source. So there may be a thought to say, hey, if we use local funding for this, can we use different design standards? And the answer for that is no. So that is why our approach is to seek federal funding for this, because either way, we're going through the IDOT process irregardless. So looking at the total cost of the project, it's about 2.9 million. So that includes phase 1 design, which we're in right now. It also includes phase 2, which is final design. It includes construction, which is in about the range of 2.3 to 2.5 million, as well as construction engineering. The anticipated federal funds for this is 2 million. We submitted for a Illinois special bridge grant in the last 3 to 4 months. We are hoping to find out in early spring if we were awarded that grant or not. If we're unsuccessful, there's another bridge grant program that we'll submit for after that. So with this current funding model, the anticipated city share will be about $850,000. And with that city share, that'll be a combination of local funds as well as motor fuel tax funds. Next slide. So this was mentioned a little bit at the beginning, but we wanted to bring up that even though we're early in the design, we're already thinking about how we can mitigate impacts during construction. So even though we're in the phase 1, where we're not necessarily designing that yet, it's still something that we're thinking about. So for instance, like during construction, adhering to construction hours, that's important. We do that for every job. Identifying detour routes, so it'll be very important that we maintain access to all the driveways. We know on the east side, the driveways are very close to the bridge. So all in that area, we'll take that into account whenever we're doing detour routes to make sure that there's routes available to the north and to the south. Specifying truck routes. I know there's been some projects in that area that have been producing a lot of trucks. We will take that into account whenever we do the final design plans and make sure that we have a specific truck route, make sure that that truck route, you know, doesn't conflict with other projects that we have in the area as well. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, so it's a little hard here. Designate contractor staging. So with a project of this size, there has to be staging area. They will have equipment, they will have material. We'll make sure in the design plans that we specify exactly where that is, so they don't put it in spots that we don't want them to put it. As well as parking areas for employees and trucks. We'll also specify that in the plans. The most important thing from this slide is communication. So before any construction starts, you'll be hearing from us again several months in advance with different forms of communication, letters. We'll probably have some type of meeting, and there'll be social media and other outreach as well through the website. Next steps. So public input, and that's what we're here for today. So we'll gather your information tonight through the general Q&A, as well as one-on-one communication that we have. And then the next couple of weeks, we'll be compiling that information. So if you have any other questions or comments in the next week or two, you can reach out to me and I can compile that information. We're also recording this Zoom. So if there's any questions for people that can attend tonight, we'll also compile that and we will present that to the HBC, which is currently slated for the end of January. At which time we'll basically, once we compile those comments, there'll be a recommendation based off those comments that would be presented to the HPC. At that meeting, we'll request a certificate of appropriateness. Upon receiving that, we'll be able to complete the phase 1 design, which is the initial design, at which time we will go into the final design, which will take about, well, the rest of the phase 1 design will be about 6 months to a year, and then there'll be another year to do the final design. I'll talk about the construction schedule here at the bottom of the slide. Other next steps is pursuing construction funding. I kind of mentioned that. So we're currently seeking outside funding and should have some more information on the grant status in early spring. Yeah, early spring of next year. In terms of phase 1 design, so that's the initial design I keep on referring to. Once we get through this public input process, as well as the HPC, we will continue with that phase 1 coordination with Idot, and it will take about a year, which I mentioned. And then after that, it'll be about another year for final design. So as of right now, the earliest that we see this project starting construction would be in 2024. So our goal would be to construct the project in 1 construction season. We want to mitigate the impact as much as we can, but we realize that it's a fairly large project. So we would look for the project to start sometime in the early spring of 2024 as of now, and then finish in fall of 2024, probably around the time that, school starts or just after. Next slide, please. Here's my contact information, and I can leave my business cards up at the front. My phone number is on there, as well as my email. So if you have any other questions, or if there's something that you think of in the next few weeks, please let me know. And then we're going to take some questions and comments. So we do have 2 audiences here. So we'll start with the audience that is in person, and then we'll check the Q&A function to see if we have any questions through the Zoom. So we'll just take any general comments or questions that you have here, and then we'll do one-on-one afterwards. Go ahead. Actually, I may have to figure out a way for you to talk to the mic if you don't mind. Or I can repeat it. Go ahead.
I have a question regarding the standards for the guardrails on the side with Idot. And because this is really a residential street, is that standard applied to like a highway standard where higher speeds are incurred, as opposed to maybe 30 to 35 mile an hour traffic on Lake Road, as opposed to 65 or 70 miles an hour on a highway?
Right, so they're.
1 second.
Oh, sorry. So there are different tiers of the crashworthiness, and there's TL1, which is, Brad, I don't even know what a TL1 would be.
Yeah, TL1 would be like.
You got to come speak in the mic.
Yeah, it's TL2 is the minimum, really.
Right, so TL2 crashworthy is appropriate for a road that's got a 25 mile an hour speed limit and an ADT of around 1,000 cars, which is what Lake Road is. TL4 is the next level up, and that's for speeds more like 40 miles an hour and a few thousand more cars. The 2 foot 10 inch concrete detail that we showed is TL2 crashworthy. The 3.5 foot is TL4 crashworthy. So the 2 foot 10 inch, that is the minimum that we can use in this setting. Even though I agree it's residential, it's low speed, it's fairly low volume, that's still what IDOT is going to require. Yes.
Kind of following on that, which of these designs TL2 one?
The question was for the designs of the guard or the railing that we showed, which are the TL2. So the TL2 would be the first 2 railing options that we showed with a decorative top. That's TL2, and the crashworthiness is what's solid, and then what you put on top is the pedestrian rail to get to 3.5 feet, which is required for when you got people walking by. So theoretically, we could do a 3.5 foot on the sidewalk side and a 2 foot 10 inch on the roadway side, but we wouldn't really want to do 2 different railings on this bridge. So we're going to have to do 3.5 feet. So we'll probably do TL4 just because it has to be that tall. But we have the option of doing something decorative if we want to.
So on that point, I mean, to me, the character of the bridge in very large part is reflected in the railing.
Mhm.
And I can't, it's very hard, and I wonder if you guys would be able to do a representation of these designs. It's not just a black and white drawing, but something that might actually look more like what it looks like. Because for me, not being a trained architect or having an eye for that, it's hard for me to really interpret that. But my main question is, it doesn't seem to me that any of those designs really replicate the balustrade that currently exists there, which to me is like a huge design element to it.
Mhm.
Is there, am I correct in that interpretation? And is there not a way to replicate that?
Brad, is there anything that's crash tested that looks like that?
No, the one that's there now has a single rebar in the middle, and I don't know what the spacing is, 2 feet. So the crash worthiness comes from actual crash testing, where they're sending vehicles at a particular angle and at a particular speed, and then figuring out what the damage was, and if that was a survivable crash. And they have to do that a series of times. So as Dave mentioned, the TL2 is only running pickup trucks and cars. The TL4 is running trucks at highway speeds. And so it's unfortunate because it really does change. It changes the look of it in a way that none of us are happy about. But the
And it has to
crashworthiness is a critical safety component.
But it has to be TL4Y, because I thought you had said.
No, it only has to be TL2, but if we're gonna do a 3.5-foot railing, it's gonna end up, that detail ends up being a TL4, but we don't have to do that.
So yeah, as Dave mentioned, we have the option of going with the TL2, which is the shorter, the 2'10" only, which opens things up a lot visually if you're a pedestrian or if you're driving. But you still have to fill the gap somehow up to 3'6" of a pedestrian rail. But that's not anything that's going to see impact from the vehicle. So from there, we can use, if we're using metal, then we can open that up quite a bit. And it just has to have a minimum requirement of passage of something, an object through it. And then the actual impact that it takes is more akin to like leaning on it. So that allows that top section to be opened up a lot. So you can still get the openness that you're looking for. That bottom 2'10" is so constrained on what we are really allowed to do for safety. We have another question.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm just taking a quick look. Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
So my question is then, if you do it, what do you call it, what was the first one,
TL2,
two? If you did that on both sides, but then put a handrail on both sides so they balance,
Mhm.
at least you get the openness without this massive concrete structure you're talking about with the TL4 or whatever.
right. Yeah, no, that's why we showed a couple of options that have the decorative railing on the top, because what we're trying to indicate is we have some leeway of what we can do with that amount of the rail. And so we're open to suggestions about what people would like to see in that area. Yes, sir.
So, I'm Martin Miller, just wondering if it's possible to have, the Regency period in England was where they discovered wrought iron and everything like that. Can people look at historic kinds of forms that might have been used that would fit in there, that would look like the neighborhood there more, some of the historic character of the neighborhood? So, in other words, you could have different designs
Mhm.
that might fit more closely with what's already there. Like you pick up from one of the houses.
More historic.
Pardon?
What about the bridge, the new bridge on, like, I want to say it's Mayflower? That looks more similar to what is here. So this design looks very contemporary. So it does not at all look like the bridge that we're discussing right now. So, but I want to say it's a new bridge on Mayflower. They used to walk by all the time. The running club goes by all the time. And it's brand, it's been done in the last few years, and it looks more with those, with the columns that kind of do what
The old
Okay.
picture does. And that was in the city. So I'm not sure what the difference is for that in the last 2 years and what the changes, have been made with IDOT in the last 2 years.
Okay, you said the Mayflower
I
Bridge?
want to say it's Mayflower. I'm sorry, but I
Okay.
think it is.
Okay,
Is the Mayflower Bridge also an IDOT jurisdiction bridge?
I don't know.
Carries being open with public vehicle crossing.
A lot of the cars go through there. I think more cars will go through there than the Woodbine Bridge.
okay.
I think we also faced this issue on the Deerpath Bridge, right? Sheridan Road by,
But that's earlier, that's 2000. So they obviously changed the standard.
my question also would be, what do other historic communities do when they have to replace the bridge? I mean, this can't be the only Lake Forest issue. I mean, it has to be other communities that are replacing historic bridges and trying to replicate that historic design. Have you looked at other communities?
So when we started this project, IDOT was getting a lot of pushback. That was in 2014, 2015, and they were starting to develop details that they were trying to be more historically sensitive, and that's when that detail that we showed, they actually worked with the SHPO to come up with that. And that was their compromise about, SHPO was accepting of it. IDOT said it's crash worthy, so they could both live with it. But I don't think either agency is terribly, super happy about it. IDOT would like it, very crash worthy, and SHPO would probably like it to be a little bit more sensitive.
I'm also thinking on Sheridan Road as you go down in Glencoe or Highland Park, where they had a series of bridges they replaced over the years that are really more historically sensitive. And that's unfortunate mountain. I don't know if they, it's worth looking down on Sheridan Road.
So there are simple metal forms or ornament forms that probably would work, like Greek key things and all. And so we just have to figure out, so is that what the architects would do, is to work on trying to find different ideas? Is that it? That would work with that thing at the top. In other words, there's a parapet below.
Mhm.
And then above the parapet, you're supposed to keep it so that things can't fly through the parapet, right?
Mhm.
So you could have a key symbol, something like
Mhm.
that, that might have to be specially manufactured, but it would be Lake Forest like.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's what we're here tonight to hear, is ideas like that. And if you've got some examples that you can point us towards, that would be great.
Look for some, yeah. You probably have some too, right?
Yeah,
Examples
no,
of-
I think we're here to listen to see which direction is most appropriate. We have a choice here, we're talking about that going in the direction of railing on top. So that's kind of one question. If that's something that isn't acceptable. So, we're looking for some ideas. Certainly, I think there's a couple of positions here, the crash tested IDOT standard is hefty. It's a lot of things. It takes time to get to one. So it's kind of, it's not those are. No one says it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we did miss part of that answer.
I won't be able to.
Just-
Sure.
Sorry.
To recap. So I think we're here to listen to some ideas and thoughts, and we have there's a lot, kind of in the stew here. So a lot of questions such as, see this going on over there, so don't mind.
Nope, nope.
So again, looking at different ideas here, is it open, is it closed? Is it concrete only? Is it concrete and metal? This idea that it would be solid, up to this point and then metal. Is that something that's floating and kind of, it has to be associated in some way? How decorative can we get? I know we had looked at those balustrade shapes being part of an engaged system that was not open, so that was less desirable, and we don't want to recreate that wheel either. There's challenges when it comes to looking at that crash tested, just the restrictions on it, because it's a combination of a couple things. It's the distance of the rebar, and I'm no engineer here, so please. But this idea that distance between the rebar, that creates a lot of problems. That's, that's responding to crash tests. That's not responding to aesthetics in any way. But yet that distance is going to define aesthetics. So that's the rub here. So we're trying to get those things to cooperate with each other. So, and I look at the concrete example, and some positives, I know it's not Beaux-Arts, that's in the cons. Some positives are that we're taking down a concrete bridge, we're putting up a concrete bridge. So there's some sort of continuity there, and we can control its texture and its color a little bit. So in that way, it's compatible. It's not Beaux-Arts, and I'm not going to say it is, but go ahead.
Question regarding balustrade. Can they not be made with bundled rebar? I don't mean a core, but around, say, 4 or 5 rebars, and then the concrete around it is more aesthetic. Would not the rebar then work towards the crash worthiness as opposed to the single half-inch rebar, which doesn't provide much?
That's a test rating thing. I can only answer like an architect would. Do you want to answer like an engineer?
Not that kind of an engineer.
Brad, if you don't mind, can you just come up here? It may be easier, so I'm not running around.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I will.
I guess my response to that is there may be a version of that works. However, it truly needed to be in the field practically tested. And so there are agencies that have funded crash testing unique rails, and that's something like Idot does. They did for this particular historic recreation, but that's, there's essentially a shopping list of potential items that we can utilize for that bottom 2'10" section. And there's other states that we can look to as well, and possibly convince Idot that there's something that is, say, in Connecticut or Texas or something that works.
Right.
And that's somewhere that I think we're all open to that, possibility, and talking with SHPO and talking with Idot about that possibility.
So
Because we're not going to pay for a crash test, but
other ideas other than what they kind of
right.
say.
This is so early in the process, and that's why it's so wonderful you guys are here in phase 1. And then we're not telling you what we're building. So that's still on the table. Absolutely.
So who will
Yeah.
have the action item of discovering other areas, and other states and other opportunities, so that it's not something you just talk about, somebody actually is out there doing it. Clearly, that's what we're getting, I think, from all of us. That we don't want to do exactly what is said us. We want to do something that is appropriate, and this will come up again with other bridges in town. So what is the process that you all will do? I mean, get there.
I mean, can I field that one? I mean, we have talked with you now, so this is good. And I think we're identifying some areas of further inquiry. And that's the job, I think, of the architecture and engineering team to go out and seek, talk to SHPO, because we do that often, and see if they are aware of any other things, talk with Idot, and do our kind of due diligence in this direction. That would be something that's appropriate to see if there are, others that were approved. But then that route means that, it's research and inquiry. So it all comes down to, are we going to find one? And then once we find one that we think is right, we're not crash test engineers. So we need to send it to Idot. Idot has to say it's okay. SHPO has to agree it's historic enough. So there's a process, I would say, that has to be gone through for us to do our due diligence in that regard, because we can't just say, oh, there's one in, San Antonio, Texas that works great. Idot. They're not going to take that, but they might look at it as another option, particularly if it is historic, it suits this, so it's kind of a what if. We can't say what we'll find, but we can certainly look further.
The National Trust has an office. National Trust has an office in Chicago.
Mhm.
We could contact them and have them help us
Mhm.
try to find where there might be examples of things. I mean, lots of places in New England, for example, Virginia might have similar problems.
Mhm. Yeah.
Minneapolis, Maryland, wouldn't want to have a bridge that looked like that.
So we can definitely open that area to inquire.
These drawings, is it possible also to give us
Yeah, I think the idea is when we start to really narrow down that, maybe more artistic rendering.
But you're talking about doing that after, not during the period where you're asking for our help. You're talking about maybe doing that when you go to bids. But we're the non-professionals who speak, so we can actually do what you're asking.
Right.
So how high is it?
Okay. And then you'd have a little bit above that on this other thing, right?
Yeah, the railing would be, it has to be a minimum up to 3.5 feet, but that's a minimum. It can,
Well, yeah, I mean, my grandchildren would be happy to climb over it. Yeah.
You know, one thing you talked about in your design analysis was just how this is a pedestrian-friendly bridge. And this whole area, I would anticipate it's more pedestrian traffic than actual car traffic. So that's pretty unique about this bridge, and I don't know if that's going to help you when you talk to Idot, saying, really, this is more of a pedestrian path than it really is traffic. Of course, you have to have that safety for traffic, but I mean, in the design aspect, you're really looking towards something that's compatible with pedestrians, really more so than vehicles. And what IDOT is presenting to you is something that's more vehicle oriented, right?
In
Well,
that
that's the
regard,
engineering requirement.
are you turning on sidewalks on both sides of both? One like we have now? Because I see an awful lot of foot traffic, as you said, coming back and forth, especially if runners are coming back and forth and they interfere with the cars traffic.
Have you done a traffic study in terms of like how many, like a car count, people, how many have you done pedestrian?
yeah, we counted cars out there.
So what about pedestrian?
No, we didn't count pedestrians. There's a sidewalk, and so pedestrians should be on the sidewalk, and I've been out there and I know people jog and run up and down that street,
Right,
but
because there's no sidewalk.
so what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a 3.5 foot pedestrian rail on the roadway side, which IDOT would probably say, you don't have to do that. You don't have to accommodate people who are in the road where they're not supposed to be, but we're going to anyway. So, but I don't know, we can't reduce the design, for the car traffic just because there's a lot of, people also walking on the street. That the railing really foremost is to keep cars out of the ravine. And then we look at, okay, now it's also a pedestrian rail. So instead of 2 feet 10 inches, it needs to be 3.5 feet.
I just want to make sure each time someone's asking a question, let me get the audio, please, so the Zoom participants can hear as well. Go ahead.
This is a question for the city, and it goes back to the reference of the Mayflower Bridge, and also my general feeling that there are a whole lot of other bridges in Lake Forest, up and down Sheridan Road and elsewhere of the same relatively specific design that have been redone, replaced, how all those issues been dealt with previously. This can't be the first Lake Forest bridge that is being dealt with in this particular fashion. In other words, what's the history of bridge replacement, and particularly addressing the aesthetics?
In 2000, the bridge that was done in 2000, there should be files on it at the city that would show what, you know, what the, if those standards have changed since then. If IDOT has made their, because that's a busy, much busier street, it's got balusters. So you'd have, you might send that to IDOT and ask them, how did this get built if we can't replicate this at another location? Because one problem we have in town is we have 99 different bridge designs. It'd be nice to settle on a bridge design that would last, you know, that you could replicate, wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every time you came around to do the new bridge.
That's what I was thinking about the Glencoe bridges or what.
Yeah, they're always nice. They're the same bridge you go through.
Are these relatively new standards by IDOT?
Since 2002 that I'm aware of, but that's the code I learned from. So
So
yeah,
this is on the borderline.
it could be older, but because crash worthiness was, Jersey barrier has been around forever, that's designed to the same standard.
Yeah, we'll look into both of those questions. I mean, it's possible some of the ones we're referring to, if it was repair, the process might be a little bit different than a full
They start
replacement.
over straight.
Yeah,
They start over with a whole new.
okay, yeah. No, we'll look into that.
What is the proposed start date for the bridge?
Yeah. So the question was, what is the proposed start date? So, so once we get through this process, we'll complete the phase one, which will take about 6 months, and then another 6 months to probably get like the approvals from IDOT. So that's about a year total. And then there'll be another year after that for what we call phase two, which is the final design. By the time you do all that math, and then we basically get lined up for an IDOT letting where they actually bid the project out for contractors to bid on. By the time you get through all that, we're looking at the summer of, like the spring of 2024.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
At the end of phase one, will you already have in your mind the design for those railings? Right now, the designs you have are extremely contemporary and totally different from what it looks like. And I think my hearing, and I don't even live on the street, I'm there every day though, but it, you know, I thought it would be very similar to what, and preserved to what it looks like today. And what you proposed tonight in those three designs, and they're very lovely, by the way, and I'm sure it was a lot of work, but they don't look anything like, they may be crash worthy, but you've got to be able to come up with a design that looks just like what we have now or very similar to it that is crash worthy. I mean, I just don't see how else you can make this go through on that street and preserve the historic view of that area. It is one of the most historic areas in Lake Forest, and probably one of the oldest areas in Lake Forest.
In the state.
In the state. So
Yeah,
it
to answer
really needs
the-
to look very similar to, with all the standards that IDOT, you know, is proposing that you have to follow to what it looks like today. That's really the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, Meg may be able to answer this better than I can. Based on the guidance from the last time we were with the HBC and SHPO, I mean, the guidance is to match like the historic character of the neighborhood. Obviously, if there are ways that we can figure out a structural solution to be closer to that design, I think we would look at it. But I think Meg's main aim and all of our aim is to match the character, at least, for sure.
I'm gonna go back to Mayflower. Mayflower matches pretty much the character. So I don't know if you've looked at Mayflower, looked at the plans and what the, you know, but that to me, I would agree with that. It's more favor than what we have here tonight.
So the good thing about tonight is, so, you know, the project, it's been a year or two since, probably more than that, since everyone's gotten together. Now we're getting the ideas flowing again. The team will meet again in the next few weeks, and look through all the different options and see kind of, you know, what we can do to solve some of these issues as we can. Yes. Let me make sure we can hear you. No?
It seems to me that from what we're getting from all of us is we're trying to be helpful. We know you work hard, but I think we need another meeting where you show us something that is somewhat close to what we're looking for before you go to the city commission, because you're going to put yourself in a position where we're going to be scared and that we're going to be coming there and saying, no, stop. you know, we need to have some collaborative feeling that we've got something close, because clearly this isn't close.
Maybe, is it more a matter of agreeing?
One second. I'm switching sides here. All right, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, is it more a matter of coming to a consensus on the process so that we all have an understanding of what that process will be? I mean, I think it is premature to have designs. I'm not sure we can arrive, you know, at some kind of consensus or agreement on the design, but we could probably come to a consensus on what that process will be. The other question I have, Mike, is I know you've identified, the city has identified this project as a priority. Is that a priority for funding purposes or for safety matters? I'm wondering what the urgency is of addressing this project or this bridge at this moment in time, given you know, the potential need to maybe do some design, you know, that a little bit different from what has been proposed tonight, that does potentially need some crash testing.
In response to the, I guess, the status and the speed at which we would like to move, as I had noted, Weiss Janney, another engineering firm, had done an evaluation of all of our bridges. And specifically on this bridge, they took different core samples, which were analyzed in a lab. All of those results were sent down to Idot. And we all know now the large sign that is up on Lake and Woodbine that nobody likes. But Idot came back and said, look, based on that study and based on that analysis, we are going to derate that bridge. You cannot put as much weight on that bridge moving forward. And as that bridge declines in condition, you are going to be allowed to put less and less weight on it to a point where we're going to tell you to close it. So that's where we're at now, where essentially we can put, I believe, what's 5-ton limit, I believe, 10,000 pound limit on the bridge. And we now are at a point where IDOT is mandating that that bridge be inspected annually. Based upon vehicle traffic, load capacity, IDOT will dictate to us on all the bridges in town how often they are inspected. So the Illinois pedestrian bridge right out here may be inspected every 3 years. Mayflower, based on its condition, may be inspected every other year. Lake-Woodbine is at a point where it now receives an annual inspection, usually around May, and those results are then sent to IDOT. And about 2 months after that, we get a report back from IDOT saying, this is what you will do. And we have to follow those rules. So that is somewhat of the urgency of why we want to proceed. But as we had noted, the phase 1, phase 2 is a process by which we have to follow if we want to pursue a grant, which we do as the city. We want to pursue a grant. If we can get 80% of the funding paid for by the state or the feds, well, then we have to do a phase 1, phase 2. If we didn't want that and we wanted to spend $3 million out of the city's coffers, we could go and start designing it right now and bid it and replace it, but that's not the process.
Still through the IDOT review process though.
With correct, IDOT.
So
IDOT has to
just to answer the last question, I mean, we will discuss options for additional feedback internally, but what, if you haven't signed in yet, please sign in at the end. And we'll go ahead and send a reminder to everyone whenever we are slotted for an HPC meeting, to give everyone advance notice for that. So please sign up for that. So it is nearing 7:45. So we have the room till 8. So if we could take maybe one more question and then kind of go to the one-on-one so we can get any other feedback after that. So, well, now I got 3, one answer to the 3. Oh, yours was first. Go ahead.
Okay, one, I don't know if this is what you were referencing, but if you're gonna send out a survey or something, because you're getting a lot of feedback, but it might be useful to, you know, take a more rigorous approach to that. I did have a question on the funding. So we're applying for a grant. At the beginning of the presentation, there was a statement that we're constrained by the how much it costs, right? Is that grant supposed to go towards that $840,000 of the city's share, or would that be additional funding on top of that that might give us some more resources?
Yeah. So
design it in a a different way or?
Gotcha. Yeah, so, yeah, the total project cost was about 2.9 million. So that 800,000 that you were referring to was actually the city's share after the grant. So the grant was 2 million. So generally grants through the state, which is federal funding usually, it's like an 80-20 grant.
Okay. so the
In
2
this
million
case,
was the grant.
what's that?
The 2 million was the grant.
Correct. If you do the math, our share is a little bit higher than 20% because with this type of project, you do have to like do the initial designs on your own. You have to locally fund that. So that's why our share is actually, I believe it's closer to like 40%. But yeah, that is taking into account the fact that we have applied for a grant and our intention is to receive a grant at some point. Correct.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
So I was on the HPC in 2014 when we were reviewing this bridge, and our direction to you was actually to replicate the bridge if possible. So exactly what Mrs. Lovell was saying, because our concern was the design had to be compatible and hopefully was going to match with what they had. Just for that, food for thought. The second idea, I was just thinking, do you need final HPC approval before you go further into? Because I'm thinking, you know, that's only a month away to get this design all figured out before you go to the HPC for final approval. Is that unrealistic to even think you could do that?
Well, I want to ask Kathy, do we need, we need to complete the phase 1? Do we need the certificate of appropriateness from Lake Forest HPC?
I believe.
So by phase 1, what we need, here, let me speak.
So if we can, if you can answer this and we'll probably conclude and then,
Okay.
and then go on to the one-on-one portion.
So by phase 1, what we mean is a project development study under NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970 something. That controls all federal funding. The Clean Air Act and noise policies and all kinds of, they're all lumped under NEPA. And we have to follow by the rules of NEPA if we want federal government to participate in the funding of this project. One of the big things under NEPA is public participation. And so Idot is very, very, very much in the public's corner when it comes to this. And they are going to make sure that we have done our homework on making sure that everybody is heard, that we have addressed all the comments, that we, to our ability, have taken all the input and reflected that back into the project. But we have a lot balanced like we've talked about here tonight. And so you saying we've still got questions, IDOT is going to hear that and say, you guys are not done with phase 1 if people still have a lot of questions. We're not approving this project on behalf of the public if they're not satisfied that you have gone through the process appropriately. On some projects that are very simple, we hold meetings like this and we don't have anybody come. Nobody cares. This is obviously the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to that. And so we have a lot of different inputs, viewpoints, things that we have to consider. And so we're here tonight so that we can try to narrow down all these different variables that we can look at. And so we've got some good direction on, this is what we want you guys to look at. So now we can go back and do our research into these specific things that you guys are talking about. I don't know process wise. I don't think we have an answer here tonight about what our process is going to look like. That's something else we need to talk about. And take not just the content of what you guys have told us tonight, but what you're asking for as far as becoming, continuing to be partners in this process. So, and we.
How about the answer to the question of the HPC meeting, the last part of?
So
are you folks going to ask them to approve a particular design?
So we're not going to go to the HPC meeting until we know that what we are going to be proposing is going to be acceptable.
Thank you.
So we're not, if we rush this process, IDOT is going to tell us to go back and do it again. And So we want to work, you know, as Mike said, there is some urgency. This bridge is not in a good way. So we can't let this drag out forever. But at the same time, rushing it never ends up being a good idea.
Worst case scenario is this. Essentially, it's gonna get decertified. Somewhere there has to be a compromise.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I think Byron said we have the room till 8 o'clock, so we will be here if you guys have any questions.
Yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and close the Zoom recording at this time. If you have any questions on the Zoom and you did not get to answer them, you can send me an email at the contact information that was shown previously. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce myself, Susie
Yeah, let me-
Atkins.